Welcome to episode 74 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. My name is William Fizzpatrick, and folks, are you ready to enter a void of pure nightmares? A world of smoke and mirrors and shattered dreams? It's time for us to enter the Dusty Paradox, aka the Twilight Zone, but with so many false finishes that it would make your head spin. Yes, folks, I've been away for a couple weeks, dealing with the last of the winter weather, obviously. The cold front came through a couple weeks ago, and, literally, I had to deal with freezing temperatures, below zero temperatures, because originally this show was going to be on Valentine's Day. But unfortunately, due to the 0-degree temperatures, I could not do a show that day. However, and the important thing for you and I is I'm back for another episode of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling as the road to 100 continues. I'm on episode 74. I plan on doing a couple more episodes for the next couple of weeks here in February, and weirdly for this show, for the first time in a while, I'm actually doing shows in the middle of the month. It either ends up being the beginning of the month or the end of the month that I end up doing shows. So, February so far has been a very weird month in the world of wrestling, as I will probably cover on this episode as well as on future shows, but it's been strange. And by far the strangest story has had to come from an unexpected source. Now, normally, Satan himself, Vince McMahon, usually dominates the headlines of weird, insane, and completely off-the-wall stories. Because, of course, it is. Because, of course, he will. It's Satan. He's going to do those kind of things. He's going to be on top and number one no matter what. Originally, this was going to be an episode that covered primarily WWE's Q4 stuff, which, again, they made $1 billion, which seems like the biggest joke ever, as their product is currently burning in basically impersonating the Centersville fire, the one in Pennsylvania, the one that constantly burns. Yeah, that one. Oh, great. So, but instead, somebody had to trump Vince McMahon himself in the crazy department. And it's one of the few wrestling families that has legitimately been able to freak out the McMahons over the decades. No, it's not the Harts. No, it's not the Von Erichs. No, it's not the Grahams. It's the Rhodeses. Oh, boy. So, yesterday, AEW publicly announced that Cody Rhodes and Brodie Rhodes, Cody's wife, and both of them are on-air talent, by the way. They both perform as wrestlers and as well as liaisons for AEW's different charitable organizations. Brodie was one of the chairmen for AEW's Heels, which is a department for fans, female fans who want to be in a special inclusive space. For some reason, they have it as a $50 membership. I didn't know exclusive clubs like that still existed these days, but there we go. And they announced, along with Tony Khan, that Cody is leaving AEW. Cody had been working without a contract for the last 6 months. He basically was able to finish off most of his storylines and feuds on what has been affectionately known as Gilligan's Island. He basically has been on a Gilligan's Island of his own for the last year and a half, away from the mainline storylines in the promotion. Now, originally, AEW was going to be covered in bigger detail in a future episode once I was able to get a hold of a guest to talk about the show and the many different positives and negatives of AEW, but, of course, the Rhodeses being the Rhodeses, they decided to pull some smoke and mirrors, and I ended up crashing through into a room full of shattered dreams. So, guess we're here today to talk about the Dusty Paradox. Now, Cody Rhodes is the son of Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes is somebody I have very conflicted feelings about. On the one hand, he was a solid babyface and an utterly despicable heel. On the other hand, he was such an insane booker that, well, his ideas were, to put it mildly, completely bonkers. Remember, this is the guy who came up with the infamous scaffold match between the Midnight Express and the Road Warriors. I'm pretty certain that Corny Bob over there's knees still remember that time he fell off the scaffold and blew out both his knees. Okay. So, the Rhodeses have been known for insane things over the years. I mean, just look at Dustin. I only need to say Dustin, and you immediately go, oh yeah, that completely makes sense. But Cody might be the most insane of the three. Sure, Dusty definitely reminds me of my grandfather, who was the former editor of the Erie Times News and Erie Morning News in terms of personality, on my mother's side of the family. A guy who he would definitely take to one of Erie's local restaurants and have a couple beers with. Absolutely vicious shark that nobody would ever want to get in the way of. And Dusty Rhodes is the same way. He was well known for having a legendary personal real-life feud with noted degenerate Ric Flair. So there's that awkwardness to it. And Dusty killing almost 2 territories, both the NWA and nearly ending WCW during his time as Booker. Once again, due to his insane ideas. He was a very creative performer. He was an artful performer, but much like a certain guy who gets blamed for the Brawl for All, didn't really have somebody to say, you know, maybe putting some wrestlers on a 40-foot tall scaffold might not be the best idea. But then again, it was the 80s. It was the age of reckless abandon, neon sunglasses, being blinded by flashy, trippy lights, and tacky haircuts, and sunglasses. So, of course, you're going to go and do the by the fast lane. Live by the fast lane, obviously. And so Cody has had a mostly successful career in wrestling, even though people have called him Cody 2.5 match star, Cody mid-card, Cody Von Doom, Dashing Cody Rhodes, all these sorts of mid-tier, mid-card gimmicks. Cody McCarty, yes, I remember all of them pretty much. Some of which have been said by people that I've done shows with before. But the big thing is that nobody expected Cody to leave AEW this soon. It was very likely that it was going to be the Bucks that were going to be leaving first, especially since they looked burnt out like a hockey puck in their recent matches. Or Kenny Omega doing something Kenny Omega-ish and pulling a New Japan and departing. Or Chris Jericho doing Chris Jericho things and acting like a hockey player in his mid-50s. But Cody was expected to stay for pretty much the long haul, or maybe being the first or second person, or maybe being the second person leaving. Not the first. Now, some people are obviously doing barbershop quartet dances on tops of roofs, for the evil has been defeated. I'm in a much more odd position about this. I find Cody to have been at his most tolerable in AEW. And the fact that he's departed AEW is a bit sad in a way, because he was one of the founders of All Elite Wrestling. And while I didn't exactly like the wrestling style that they were putting out at first, I thought it was a little bit too, flash and not enough substance, it's kind of revived itself into being basically sort of the revival of the National Wrestling Alliance. It's not, it's the NWA Mid-South. It's the revival of Mid-South. It's not WCW. Jobbers end up getting turned into paste in this promotion. If you watch any of the squash matches, Dark is essentially Mid-South TV tapings. Same with Elevation, or as I like to call it, Show of the Bigs Takeshi's Castle. Also, Cody was on Roads to the Top, which is a reality TV show provided to them by Warner Media, which has been bought out by Discovery Communications, which is now in a weird situation where that acquisition is in a weird state of being existence. as well as Go Big Show, which apparently is a literal Takeshi's Castle spinoff of sorts. Um, I'm pretty certain that the show of the Big is quite sad at this point that he wasn't able to punch Cody Rhodes in the face for the feuds that he had with him back in WWE back in 2015. And for longtime Wacky World of Wrestling viewers, you may be familiar with Cody because he was on the very second segment of Wacky World of Wrestling after Wade Barrett, professional marine biologist and professional barber, ended up getting a trauma to barbershop chairs on the August 7th, 2013 edition of WWE Raw, which was the very first episode of Wacky World of Wrestling. So, Cody has been covered before on the show, sometimes with some consistency. I think that he's a consistent wrestler. Never was really particularly wowed by him. There were segments where his character work definitely shined through. AEW was the promotion, as I said, was where he was by far the most tolerable to me. In WWE, he was either being overpushed, overexposed, or not being pushed enough, and not being put in the right kind of matches to suit his skill set. And he does have a skill set. The problem often becomes the situation of, oh, we just want you to be in the mid-card, in this perpetual purgatory. You know, a Dusty finish that never ends. That's the problem with him being stuck in the Dusty paradox. They expect him to be his father. It has been talked about consistently by other wrestling journalists that there was always this consideration that Cody was going to basically be like Dusty. Cody is not Dusty. Far from it in that situation. He has his own ideology, he has his own differences when it comes to creative stuff, and that was the big bottleneck. Tony Khan has been taking over more of the promotion ever since his two other issues have risen. The two other issues being the clown show that is the Jacksonville Jaguars, which at this point in time, they'd be lucky if they become AEW wrestlers at this stage, instead of being football players. Where beforehand, it was the wrestlers that were doomed to the prospect of becoming tight ends, offensive linemen, defensive backs, and cheerleaders for the Jaguars if this promotion actually exploded. Like Impact or NXT. In the Howard Hughes suite, Hunter is currently crying as we speak, as I just mentioned that. We'll get to him in a second, however, because this actually does tie into WWE in a way, because multiple sources, i.e. everybody in the wrestling industry basically, is saying that Cody is coming back to WWE, which ties us into this bizarro paradox that we happen to be in. Yes, we are living in this timeline right now, where the possibility of Cody Rhodes returning to WWE, of all places, is highly likely. And all of us are a little bit perplexed by it, a little bit confused. I mean, people in AEW, from multiple outlets, Torch, Observer, everybody, is saying that they expected Cody to re-sign with the company. They expected him to sign with AEW, with the company, and stay with them for the next 4 or 5 years. I mean, Cody's 36. He's obviously first and foremost looking for, his... Because I think he's looking for his second to last payday. Because he's at 36 right now, and that's a young age for a upper mid-card main eventer wrestler. And I know people are going to scoff at the fact that I just said main eventer, but he did have some great matches in AEW. The Brodie Lee match, the matches he's had with Sammy Guevara, he's had fantastic matches with Darby Allin. He's had great matches. The problem is the crowd reaction to him has been mixed to negative. He had that messed up angle with Anthony Oregano, and I'm probably botching his last name as I say that, but he's a British boxer. And this was a feud between QT Marshall and the Factory, and it just ended up going off the rails with him going with this weirdo American Dream tangent, despite the fact that, once again, he's not Dusty. He's an evil clone of Dusty, but he's not Dusty. Something I think he has had to reiterate to people time and time and time again, that his personality is more like his mother. And considering that he and Charlotte Flair are basically the last two relics of WCW circa 2000. I mean, allegedly he was wrestling in a he was the guy in the chicken suit during the Terry Funk Dustin Runnels angle that they had. And Charlotte appeared on camera a couple of times in WCW. So technically, they're WCW wrestlers that have been in WWE. So now you have the question, obviously, of, well, what went wrong? Well, first and foremost, people are saying it was about money. I kind of buy it a bit. He wanted to be paid at the same level of the Bryan Danielsons and the CM Punks, and I can understand that. From a sports perspective, he's a veteran. He is one of your founding wrestlers of your promotion. He expects to be paid around the same as the other wrestlers that you happen to be bringing in. Unfortunately, the wrestlers you're bringing in at that time period are wrestlers that are just there to build auxiliary, a couple of young prospects, a couple of future stars, some veterans holding down the fort so the prospects don't get rushed up the card too far because of the inevitable backlash that will come from the fans if you push a young star too far and they think that it's somebody's creator's pet. Ask any WWE creative writer and they will probably tell you exactly the same thing. That a young wrestler will get over, but then they will get hated by the crowd because they are then overexposed too much. Because they are in either too many segments, or their character has gotten as stale as a 5-day-old piece of French bread. You get the picture. So you end up in a situation where you're having to rely on legends and veterans, people who will constantly get boos or cheers, or will be over or not over, or you'll have to fake in some crowd noise and stuff like that. But the nightmare that was Cody was that he was stuck on Gilligan's Island. He was stuck in the mid-card in AEW. He was not being pushed up to the top because he couldn't compete for the world title because they had made an angle with him and Chris Jericho where he could not compete for that title. A lot of the AEW founders took losses so that other people could get over so that they could have a stable roster. A lot of the fans who tied into All In got upset about that and started becoming a bit upset about the ex-WWE rejects that they were bringing in because this is exactly the same kind of reaction that people get when they go to Impact, when they go to Ring of Honor, and they've been with WWE a very long time because that is the name brand, recognized, generic cereal of professional wrestling. It's like bran flakes. It's healthy to an extent, but it doesn't taste particularly good. Unless you're a person who likes bran flakes, and obviously you're going to probably have a bit of an issue with this episode because I just insulted bran flakes. But Cody is on his own with the TNT Championship, and he has some solid matches. He has some decent angles. He has a couple of disasters on the mic. His character refuses to turn heel. He refuses to turn heel because he's done it before. He did it for like about 4 years. He kind of wants to stay his babyface, but it doesn't really work. He's trying to portray himself as something he isn't. He's trying to portray himself as basically Proto-Dusty, except skinnier and far evil and probably owns an island in Latveria and constructs a giant robot in his own image. And then, of course, the money thing, which I went, look, Tony, I know that it was going to be very pricey for you to have a rematch between Cody and Shaquille O'Neal in giant robots, customized in the face of Cody and a basketball, because basketballs do indeed hold grudges, as Batista's always said. Actually, basketballs do actually hold grudges, and as Batista found out to his horror when he had to fight an army of sentient living basketballs. I believe that was in a deleted scene in Guardians of the Galaxy, possibly. I mean, don't quote me on that, but again, basketballs do indeed hold grudges, so, having a robot sumo match on the roof of the Cabo Hall, it's going to be pricey, it was going to be expensive, but do you really think that the blow-up that's happening right now on social media was worth it? I mean, I know that you guys were trying to keep this under wraps, but people found out pretty quickly that Cody's contract was about to expire. And the rational thinking amongst everybody was that, oh, you're gonna re-sign him. You're gonna re-sign him to a tidy little deal here. He's gonna be, unfortunately, stuck on people's TV screens for the next 3 years because people have a resounding amount of hatred towards Cody. I mean, obviously, for the questionable American Dream style promo he did with the factory, obviously, which brought up a lot of racial implications that was not particularly well thought out. His on-screen relationship with his wife Brandy, who has also caused a couple of people's eyeballs to go like, she's a feature player. Brandy basically winning matches in the same way as Charlotte Flair, except without the, submission maneuvers or something like that. But that same kind of style of, we want the ones who are exciting and interesting, not an evil clone version of Sapphire. Yes, Evil, Dusty, and Sapphire is the nickname I have for those two, and it's very apt, because they're basically like evil clones of people who are more well-liked and popular and cool. I mean, going into this bizarro paradox of the Rhodeses, I mean, there's some creative stuff that the Rhodes family has done that I like, but at the same time, the amount of zany crazy that has come from this family, I just go, gosh, I hope I don't gain a sudden urge to wear polka dots or put a ridiculous looking neck tattoo on. Folks, note, if I do put a neck tattoo on, please call an exorcist, because that will probably be the day that Fizzy has gone insane instead of sane. And fortunately, I do not have a neck tattoo. I hate needles. That's note. I hate needles as far as tattooing is concerned. I'm fully vaccinated. To those of you who may not be aware of that, but yes, it's something I talked about in the past episode. But as far as like tattooing with nickel and needles and stuff like that, no, I would not do that unless I've gone completely into the Dusty paradox and suddenly I'm ringing a cowbell, singing Dusty Rhodes' WWF theme song, and wearing polka dots. I mean, yeah, the polka dots thing, which everybody brings up. It's just a situation where I'm just like looking at this, I'm going, this is just so weird. You are developed a PR disaster that Cody is left. Everybody's talking about this. Whether positively or negatively about Cody, it doesn't really matter. People are talking. And so people's ambition of AEW falling like a crater and then Barbershop Quartet dancing on the roof is going to be justified a bit, because they're like, oh, it's now confirmed that the founders are fighting. I mean, they did have some tension. They did, obviously, but that's normal. They had some tension. They had some fights with each other about creative decisions, but that's what people do. It's not going to be happy, happy-go-lucky, cheerful happiness, oh, wonderful, happy, whoop drops joy. We're all so happy to be together. And sharing and kindness and wonderful glory, jumps joy. Oh, happy, happy days. People are expecting that. That's not how the real world works, okay? There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be fights between people. There's going to be all sorts of things that are going to happen in those situations. I mean, Cody may go from having the look of being dashing to looking like somebody who's trying to buy cigarettes at a 7-Eleven with a ridiculous-looking neck tattoo of his logo, which I'm certain Vince is going to be very confused of, going, guys, I didn't ask you to... guys, I didn't hire you to ask you to rehire Gilbert. Gosh, dang it. No, sir, this is Cody Rhodes. Cody who? Cody Rhodes, the guy that we had on our developmental roster from 2005 until the 2010s when he left because we... Oh, you mean the guy we put in that Stardust outfit? Let's get that Stardust outfit out of storage. I mean, everybody's expecting, Stardust is going to come back. Cody does not like Stardust, apparently. He hated that gimmick. I was very vocal about that. And you have a situation where AEW is in a weird position from a PR standpoint, a company that has had trouble with its PR in the past. Public relations has never been one of Tony Khan's strong suits because there's two things. Like I said, earlier I mentioned the disaster that was the Jacksonville Jaguars and how Tony would get into spats with the football players on Twitter. Yes, getting into spats with people on the bird thing is a very smart idea. He says sarcastically, thinking that the viewers will know that's what I mean. And then the second thing, which was his disaster with the professional soccer team that they own. So that's two strikes. In India culture, you should not have a lot of strikes on you because you will be perceived as a failure and you won't be trusted with big, important things. And this is a big, important thing. This wrestling promotion is something that is very near and dear to Tony Khan's heart because he's been involved with wrestling forums. He understands the business. He maybe dives a little bit too far into the UWF Herb Abrams territory for my liking, but again, can't help who you're idolizing a bit. His tendency to go NWA and UWF, not the Bill Watts version, although I think Bill Watts' version is kind of influencing the project a little bit with JR on comms and being in a creative position. So you have this situation where Cody is on Gilligan's Island putting people over, which is fine. People wanted him to put people over. This was a situation that could have developed into a Charlotte Flair situation where Charlotte doesn't put people over and ends up fighting against the main eventer that they want to see lose, or a MMA fighter who comes back into the company rather awkwardly in a Royal Rumble where you literally have to draft half a dozen ex-talent to actually fill it because you've cut your roster so thin. Gosh, that Rumble was weird. I mean, I'll talk about the Rumble probably either on a future episode or talk about it a little bit here, but like... So you have a situation where Cody wants more creative roles, which I can understand. If his creative stuff actually worked, I would be fine with that, but it was inconsistent. It wasn't getting the kind of reaction people wanted. Some people thought that his last good year was in 2020. In 2021, he was basically an aberration. Like on one of the biggest pay-per-view cards they had, he wasn't on the card. He's dressing up like Homelander from The Boys. Not exactly the best character to be portraying as your ring attire. He had a fantastic feud with the Dark Order and the Exalted One, the late Brodie Lee. But at the same time, you get those kind of diminishing returns. I mean, they just announced a dog collar match between MJF and CM Punk. So that's the type of match type that Cody does. And now they're doing it with two different performers. A performer that would have been with Cody and would have feuded with Cody and has feuded with Cody and MJF is now feuding with Punk, and Punk is now in the Cody position. That's kind of interesting how that dynamic has happened. As I'm continuing with the veteran thing, they took a risk on Bryan Danielson and CM Punk to bring in veteran support after Jon Moxley had to go to rehab. Fantastic decision, by the way, for him to go to do that. He's been a lot better since he returned from his stint. And Kenny Omega, who basically was a Mega Man figure that had been slammed with a sledgehammer. So he had a lot of injuries, and obviously he needed to take some time off. So you have a situation where you need to bring in some veterans that are high risk but can give you decent rewards if they are used in a proper capacity. They did that with Punk, and they're doing that with Bryan Danielson. He's now working a program with Jon Moxley, which may turn into a team-up stable, which might be interesting. But at the same time, you don't have anything for Cody. And people are like, oh, well, Cody Rhodes is irrelevant. Cody Rhodes is just a name. He's somebody that AEW doesn't need. AEW kind of does need him to an extent, just not in the way you might be thinking. See, WWE does not forgive. They do not forget. And much like a Romanian Jewish person would say, you're not going to forgive, you're not going to forget, and you're always going to get even. It's called never forgive, never forget, and always get even. That's a Romanian Jewish saying. Guess what they're doing right now? So, after literally destroying Isengard, burning it to the ground, and destroying everything that Triple H touches with the Shovel of Infinity, Nick Khan, going full Genghis on developmental and on the structure within WWE's corporate culture, has decided that he wants to strike back against his doppelganger, Tony Khan, and figures, you've been taking pounds of flesh from my promotion? Okay, I'll take some pound of flesh out of yours. And in this case, he decides to reach into the Dusty Paradox, through the lenses of smokes and mirrors, through the darkening void of shattered dreams, and into the polka-dotted land of whimsy and plumbers. Because he's about to bring Cody into WWE. And that smashing sound you're hearing is Hunter repeatedly slamming his head into the side of a Vegas hotel wall. Because that's not something that Triple H wants. Let me explain why. The reason why Cody left was over creative decisions. You might be thinking to yourself, it's WWE. He's not going to have the kind of creative freedom. Oh, yes, he is. He's going to draft up a contract. He's going to get creative control. Vince is so desperate right now to appease shareholders of the company because WWE just made $1 billion. I can immediately now tell you that there are 1 billion problems with that. Because now suddenly, you're now put in a position of a pedestal being a publicly traded company that has $1 billion of value, $1 billion of revenue. You know, you're having revenue come in. The problem is that companies expect you to raise your bar on your product a bit. I mean, I know people are complaining about WWE's in-ring product. I mean, the investors at this point haven't really particularly cared about that, but they do listen to social media reactions. They do listen to fan feedback. They may decide to incinerate you in a giant popcorn tin. Make you into a pack of crunchy pork rinds, but at the same time, they will listen. Or batter dip you into some chocolate, in the case of Mars Candy Companies. But Mars has been busy dumping NASCAR like a jilted ex-girlfriend. And now they're possibly thinking about reinvesting that sponsorship money that they had just freed up into their brand new advertising campaign, which, again, Mars has not updated their advertising campaign since about 1995. They tried to do the M&M's personality thing with those creepy commercials with the people who were turned into M&M's. Yeah, those realistic-looking M&M commercials. I just brought that back into your brain. I'm kind of in a whimsy, wacky mood today, so obviously you're going to be sleeping well tonight with all the nightmares you're about to have. Just think about 13 more Charlotte Flair title reigns and it will be all better. The mental image of screaming, even from the Charlotte diehards, is just echoing through the chambers of my headset at the moment. Regardless, we have a situation now where Nick Khan needs to bring people around him that are going to be kind of loyal to him. All right, Cody, I'll cave to your demands. I'll pay you exactly the same level that you wanted, that Tony was going to pay, that was Tony is paying to Danielson and Punk. I'll even give you creative control. You just do me one favor. Take this glowing shovel with all these gems on it, go to Las Vegas, and bury a little problem for me. Will ya? And then Triple H ends up Wicked Witch of the East and is buried underneath a giant golden Justy statue. Yes, seriously. The odds of that happening, of Triple H departing WWE, are now been increased. Because his creative role's been diminished. His promotion has literally been torn to shreds by a Freddy Krueger wannabe. Making Genghis proud, I see, Nick. And so you have a situation now where the unlikely thing of Cody Rhodes coming into WWE is very much a possibility, and everybody's just like either downplaying it, they're going, oh, it's not going to be too big of a deal, he's going to get creatively ruined by WWE. Cody knows enough about their creative division to avoid that this time. He has enough experience to deal with it. He has been out of that environment for years, so he's now cognitively thinking a lot clearer than he was previously. The Indies were basically a therapy for him. Kevin Owens basically said to the Bucks, "Hey, you're his therapist now. Um, please help him." And I appreciate Kevin Owens for doing that because, again, there are some good points to Cody. If you've ever read the Players Tribune article that Amanda Huber, the wife of the late Brodie Lee, posted about John, about her husband, there is a chapter in there late in the story where she calls up Big E and Cody Rhodes, and they have to deliver the news and hang out with her kids and tell them the news that their father is not going to make it. So for me, regardless of whatever performances Cody does, that has earned him a lot of goodwill with me for him to do that because talking about death to a young child is not an easy task. It is not something that many people can do. And for the two of them to do that, for this to be a situation where all company feuding aside, because again, WWE wrestlers and AEW wrestlers do not feud with each other for the most part. They're in this together. And this is one of those unity situations where nobody is going to object to this because it's a topic about death. And, people like Vince and Tony are not going to object to that because Vince fears death. And Tony, obviously, death is a very important custom in India. In India and Pakistan. It's one of those things that they agree upon where it's treated very seriously. And the Brodie Lee tribute show is a highlight of AEW's run so far, where they treat everything importantly, but it's also a fun show. It's also a sad show. It's also a show that just works on paper and works in principle. And everybody did their jobs fantastically on that show. I feel really bad for the people who knew Brodie, who are still affected by his death, who have to deal with that. You know, from the perspective of they expected him to be around a lot longer. They expected him to be in a creative role. They expected him to sit there in AEW, and I appreciate that what he did. I've always been a big fan of Brodie Lee / Luke Harper, and his matches with Cody Rhodes were fantastic. Both of them played their parts phenomenally, as Harper being a scheming Eastman Kodak Bob boss with this Dark Order as the higher power worked so well because he wasn't trying to be a Vince copy. He was trying to be a corrupt Eastman Kodak salesman shaking you down to buy another camera bulb for your camera or film reel. So that you can actually take photos. He was that kind of hardball salesman. I'm like, and then of course also there's a little bit of Harold Ballard in that character. Harold Ballard, the legendarily insane owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who makes Vince look like a 5-year-old infantile child by comparison for the kind of diabolically evil antics that he was a part of. Yes, Vince has been a part of a lot of evil antics in the past. Compare him to Harold Ballard. I'm dead serious. Compare him to Ballard. You'll find out that Harold's worse. So you have a situation where Cody has these great feuds, and now all of a sudden he's got nothing. He's doing feuds with younger talent. He's doing feuds with people that are kind of fringe prospects, may work out, may not work out, depends entirely on what happens. And obviously, it is a situation where it's not ideally obtainable or good for him, but it sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. Like any wrestler that goes into a feud, sometimes things don't work out. Again, the factory feud that Cody had was supposed to be bringing up a bunch of young guys from the Nightmare Factory, the school that he part owns with his brother, as well as with QT Marshall, the most generic-looking individual in the history of mankind. more generic than El Generico. Decent trainer. Has basically been turned into a flipping dummy by Hook at this point, which, again, I will cover him obviously in a future episode, because this is not going to be a Hook-centric episode. But the thing is that, again, he is now in a situation where he has optimal creative control. The likelihood that he might end up debuting at Elimination Chamber, the most awkwardly named program at the moment, because they're holding the show in Saudi Arabia. Oh, we're going back there. We're going back and renewing our vows for yet another round of the awkward arranged marriage between the Saudi Arabian government and WWE. And I continuously wonder, when is the Arab Spring inevitably going to burst like an oil well, when they suddenly realize that they are dealing with a guy who has the personality of a 11th century Arab warlord who is going to ride on a camel naked, covered in blood, with the heads of his enemies strapped to a belt, because that's Vince. He's an 11th century Arab warlord, and you continuously allow him into your country. And you don't expect it to end up turning into a disaster? I mean, did he promise you, as a part of the $50 million that you give to them in the other tab of your financial investments, that, oh, hey, guys, I can give you Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire? Both of them have been dead for years. And when Dusty and Sapphire do debut, it's, excuse me for a second. It is not Dusty and Sapphire, but instead their evil clones or their doppelgangers that are doing the show. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a bit of a strange situation for everybody involved, where is he going to debut on Elimination Chamber? Is he going to debut at WrestleMania? Now people are talking about that. Again, people are talking about Cody, which is odd, because people were kind of in this sort of situation where they were happy that Cody was sort of basically a mime trapped in a box, playing Smoke and Mirrors on repeat, you know? Trapped in this box, banging against the side of it, and just like, you know, he's a mime. Same with Randy, they're mimes, you know? They're like storehouse mannequins that are, you know, waving at the crowd. But you don't really expect them to really do anything. In fact, I think there was sort of a contentment there with people. Excuse me for a second. Had to give myself something to drink there after a little bit of a sneezing fit earlier. Apologies for that. But now you have a situation where Cody's coming back with possible creative control. A guy that Nick Khan can use to finally rid himself of the shovelly menace that has plagued him and his spending department. Because here's the thing. Cody and Hunter do not like each other. Cody can do all the rose-tinted, flowery interviews in existence, talking about how great Triple H is, how great Hunter is. Please. I buy that as much as Dusty Rhodes being the light heavyweight champion of the world. Okay? Or Dustin Rhodes not being weird. Okay? I buy that as much as Charlotte Flair putting somebody over. Seriously. Cody hates Hunter for what happened when NXT, because he wanted to be a trainer and develop people down there in Full Sail, along with Dustin, and they both get cut. And they're both upset about it. And they're like, what? Okay, you cut us out of this. And then there was the weird tension between Stephanie and Dusty during their promo segments with the Authority and the Rhodes family. How they treated Cody with the Stardust character and all that stuff. There's a lot of animosity between those two. There's one big difference, however. That was back in 2015 when Hunter had all the control in the world, and used his shovel of affinity to bury everyone who was in his way in the WWE universe. I mean, seriously, he had this match with Brock Lesnar for the Divas Championship. He had all this creative control in the world. He had his end of era match with The Undertaker. And that was a thing that happened. It didn't turn out to be an end of an era. They kept spinning their rails for about a couple years afterwards, actually. If you want somebody to finish a job, then have Brock Lesnar ride a meteorite into the arena. That will finish everybody and the dinosaurs off. That's there. 50 million years ago when Brock Lesnar ended the dinosaurs. 65 million years ago when Brock Lesnar ended the dinosaurs and began an age of pork beast where he's F5ing mammals and sharks in a prehistoric landscape. Inspired like a Doc Savage comic from the 1920s. So you have a situation, again, where you have somebody who is going to be asking for creative control. You have somebody who is going to be very well aware of what their value is, and considering how decimated WWE has been for name brand generic superstars, Cody fits that role perfectly. He's a name. People know his name. Sure, he's been a mime trapped in a box for the last year in AEW in some kind of bizarro booking quarantine, but again, he's helped out with other people. He's done some good, but he's also done some bad. He's done some wrong, obviously. That's the weird thing with Cody. You're always at a crossroads with him. Like, 1 minute he's doing good, he's doing fantastic, he's performing at standard, and then the next minute everything goes dusty, Paradox. And suddenly everything gets dusty finished. And chaos reigns supreme, and everybody gets disinterested in what you're doing because you're pulling all of these dusty finishes. Which kills the town. And I don't think anybody in AEW wanted to go into a, oh, geez Louise, he's going full dusty. Quick, get the Exorcist material. Burn every polka dot that you see alive. Yes, that includes the tablecloths. Anything that is a polka or a dot must be burned in a sacred fire. So, for them, it's an awkward situation of, okay, we gotta let you go. We're not paying you at the level of a Punk or a Danielson, so you get to go to WWE and pull your, in a reverse Impact role, pull a anti-AEW promo, very likely. Talk about some stuff, shoot on your view stuff, because I think they're going to acknowledge his past. They're not going to directly reference AEW because of all legal issues, and, of course, Warner Media, which is a part of Turner Network, having a bit of an issue with WWE for very obvious reasons. I think they've written about 15 different books on those reasons. That would be the Monday Night Wars. One of the few people who could out-crazy Vince and Ted Turner actually going out and out-crazying him for a bit. And Eric Bischoff is along for the wild roller coaster ride on the Six Flags Express. So you have a situation, again, and like I said, creative control, very likely going to be bringing Brandy in, so we all have the wonderful, happy joy of looking forward to Brandy Rhodes versus Charlotte Flair. I just gave you all nightmares for weeks now, didn't I? And even though there have been some reports that Brandy might not be coming with Cody to WWE, you can't count that out. I mean, everybody thought that Paul Heyman was done for in WWE, and yet he shows back up again. Why not Brandy? I know people are going to be enraged about that, but again, I'm kind of in the mood where I want to roast some marshmallows and see the chaos fly. After all, this has been a bit of a chaos month so far in the month of wrestling. Now, hasn't it? So, Cody will have creative control. He will have the ability to book his matches how he wants to. There might be some WWE fighting. He might go back to the Indies if things don't go well. He might go back to AEW with an apology cake. things might go in that direction. But again, Hunter is going to be buried alive under a giant golden dusty statue in Vegas because Cody is going in this for revenge. Hunter is in a situation where he's in a really bad position. As I have said consistently on this show over the years, sports agents were going to be one of his critical weaknesses. Nick Khan is not pulling the same mistakes that the likes of the Bingo Master George Barrios or Triple H have done. One major slip-up is all it takes for you to get on the bad side of the board of directors and for them to start pressuring Vince by going, "Say, Vince, you want some of that nice, healthy funding now, don't you? And, we kind of want you to do this." And Vince is somebody who gets defensive and starts kind of succumbing to peer pressure to an extent, especially if especially if your name happens to be Ebersol, which I assume is a profanity-related word. It's basically is the same thing as the word you can't say on television or public radio. If you say the word Ebersol in a WWE office, you're probably going to be roasted alive, or melted in chocolate, or turned into a sub, or eaten by Lucha Libre cannibals. Because you know full well Mysterio probably has an army of those at this point. But the thing is, Cody coming back to WWE is weird, and I'm going to miss those two. I like them being in their own little world away from the main event scene, in their own little segments, and while other people absolutely despise them, or some people like them, they were basically adequate. They're tolerable. I didn't really have anything to really hate about them. Because again, even though there were definitely some very questionable promos, I will say that, talking about race in this climate is difficult to do. And a guy who is blonde and has a really questionable American Nightmare tattoo on his neck is probably not the best representation for race. Gonna point that out there, even though you are strange. And any Klansman to worth their salt would probably burn him at the stake for marrying a Haitian lady. But again, I'm well aware of racial culture. Okay, I did my history lessons. That was one of the things we covered. We covered the Civil War. So I'm well versed in that. So I know that it's difficult to talk about that in the South. I lived in the South for a few years. I lived in the Midwest for a few years. It's a very different culture out there. Some people get it, and some... You're dealing with people who are going to be absolutely desperate, and they're going to cling to whatever they can. Right now, we have a situation where WWE is in a weird situation where they are desperate. They are angry. The management is angry with AEW for the consistent messing with their product. They're constantly beating them in the ratings, so naturally, of course, Vince is going to go, "Okay, Nick, what pound of flesh are we going to be taking out of them?" Well, obviously, they're not signing Kenny, because Kenny hates the company. Punk is basically the biggest joke that they could possibly pull, would be signing him. He's not going. He's one of the few that is not going to come back to WWE. No. Okay, that is a situation of, no, that bridge is so badly burnt that you can see the rocky foundations underneath have been burnt by the 10,000 degrees of molten lava. No. Danielson, maybe. He might come back at some point. Who knows? Again, the Bucks, probably not, but it's not out of the possibility. But again, it's a situation where they needed a generic name brand star, some spice, some oatmeal spice to add to their brand cereal. And here comes Cody Rhodes. He's back in the fold, I guess. He's not signed with WWE yet, obviously. That's obviously a lot of speculation. But, okay, when 50,000 different sources are telling you, one, this is not a work shoot, this is legit. He has legit left. This is not any kind of angle. This is not any kind of storyline. This isn't some kind of work. This is legit. Everybody is saying that. Nobody is saying otherwise. And those who are even speculating about it are now starting to realize that Rhodes boy was serious, wasn't he? He's gone completely cuckoo. And the idea of him coming back to do with him coming back to WWE again, it's like it's that weird situation where everybody's like, he's actually gonna do that, isn't he? He's actually gonna come back to Vince, and I know people are always saying, well, oh, they all come back. This is for a specific purpose, and it's not Vince related. It's Nick. Nick wants people, like I said, that are controllable. And Cody's controllable. Especially since Cody has a gigantic shovel to grind against dear old Sludgy McShovel for the way that he handled him back in 2015 with the booking and the angles and the storylines that they had. And we all know that the Rhodes, they hold a grudge. They don't forget. They get along great with Romanians. I mean, they would never forget, never forgive to an extent, and they always try to get even, obviously. But, like, that's the thing about entering this Dusty Paradox. You know what kind of insanity you're getting yourself into. You're going to have weird angles, bizarre storylines, acting chops, kinda. And just the general weirdness. I mean, like, here's the thing. I view Cody as weirder than Goldust. He's weirder than Goldust. Think about that for 5 seconds. Goldust, the bizarre one. That is not as weird a character as Cody Rhodes, plain Jane Cody Rhodes is. You look at this guy, you go, he looks like an action figure come to life. Or a mannequin from a Twilight Zone episode come to life. He looks like the kind of character that you would see in a horror film. And he was actually a villain in the Arrow TV series. You know, he looks like a comic book villain. And that comic book villain distinction is something that has troubled him throughout his career because, like, I'm dashing. I look like a Tesla investor. Or, what's their name? Proud Boys, I guess you could call it? Yeah. One of those people. But here's the thing. He's too crazy for them. He's too crazy for the Tesla people or the young Proud Boys or anything else like that, okay? This is a Rhodes we're talking about. The kind of nutty that nobody can really prepare for. Unless you happen to be somebody like me, and I've studied Cody. I've studied the Rhodeses. I've studied their character. I've studied their personalities. I've read autobiographies. I've done the research. Like, seriously. They're pleasant enough as long as you don't get in their way. And then the drive and determination to wreck you. Eat you alive like you're a swimmer in a pool full of sharks. That's what happens. So you now have a situation with a vengeful Cody Rhodes coming back as a giant robot who might re-debut at Elimination Chamber. Oh, great. That international incident will be super fun to witness. Now, won't it? You have now a situation where what happens if Triple H goes to AEW now? That's a very big possibility now. I know people will basically see it as the end is nigh. Although they've been probably, they've been preparing for the wrestling equivalent of the Mayan Apocalypse. Would Evil, Dusty, and Sapphire coming back to WWE be that equivalent of the Mayan Apocalypse for WWE, though? Because, once again, we are dealing with the Dusty Paradox. It is unnatural. It's this phenomenon that twists and turns people into this insane void of polka dots and stars and astral projections, and all sorts of strangeness comes afoot as you're entering into this really interesting creative storyteller. Twisted and turned, and like I said, it only takes one mistake or two mistakes to really get on somebody's bad side in WWE, and you're gone, or your role is diminished. Because he who is the strongest is the one who survives. George Barrios thought he had the investors and stockbrokers and everybody around him on his side until the network bombed. And you have a situation where suddenly Vince is going, I signed away all these TV rights, and all of a sudden we can't get a network that works correctly because version 2.0 of the network hardly ever worked for me. It was nice, it was pleasant, but it barely functioned. It could barely log me in. Seriously, it was like a weird thing to deal with. So he got axed along with Michelle Wilson, and now they're trying to conquer the world of bowling. Yes, I'm dead serious. Bowling. They're investing into bowling alleys and professional bowling tournaments, which is a big industry apparently. Triple H, he literally during an investor conference before WrestleMania puts out this gigantic World War II style conquest map with all of these different nations under the banner of NXT. And that bombed spectacularly. In addition to being over budget, in addition to all of the problems that came with that, from speaking out to logistics to talent signing to roster makeup, everything that could have possibly gone wrong for Sludgy McShovel did. And now he's in the Howard Hughes suite, literally staring at a wall after having literally the plot of Ocean's 13 happen to him. He just become Ruben Tikhonov and has had a heart attack, or at least a heart issue. And Nick Khan goes full Willie Bank and takes over his operation and starts slashing and chopping people up like a slasher movie villain. I mean, Jason Voorhees has nothing on Nick Khan right now. He's going into these divisions that haven't changed in over 25 years and just going, you're cut, you're redundant, you're cut, you're redundant. And you're the final, you're the final person who's the survivor here. It's like a slasher film in the offices of a land that is literally so tribalistic that they have their own kingdoms and fiefdoms. They want to condense everybody into one space after being into 4 or 5 spaces at the corporate office of the 7 levels of hell known as Titan Towers. Or is it 9 levels? I think they may have expanded a couple of times during the Attitude Era. Maybe 12 or 11. That might be, sort of that levels. Because obviously Vince needs to, outdo Lucifer when it comes to his satanic evil. Okay. He is Satan after all. He's not going to sit idly by and let some newcomer punk and his merry band of misfits, take over the world of professional wrestling. Because even at 76, Vince is scary. Because he's very predictable. But the problem is that, as I've said before, if you play Satan's game, Satan wins in the end. And a lot of people, they think that they can beat Vince, or they can challenge him, or they can do this or that, and it's like one of the few bits of truth that the Hoagie Man has ever said in pro wrestling is, you can't beat him, brother. He will drive you to the ends of the earth, man. You can't defeat him. His drive is just like, and of course it's because they all have the same kind of personality archetype, which is weak against a guy like Vince. Put him against a guy who is as crazy as he is, though. There's only very few people that have ever out-crazied Vince. Dusty Rhodes is one of them. The others are Roddy Piper and the Hart family. He thinks the Harts are insane. He thinks that Roddy Piper was insane. Roddy was one of the few people who could actually get under his skin. Not in, the negative way, but in the, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to bury my, I'm going to have to lock my doors and shut my windows because Roddy is insane. And then, of course, Dusty Rhodes. Because Dusty Rhodes and Vince McMahon had the same kind of personality, as well as the fact that Dusty was from the old generation, which, again, Vince respects those people. He respected those people from the old generation. Because, again, he was brought into the business to respect the older generation. Even though he is literally literal Satan in the wrestling world, that was a situation of like, um, that it was the thing that happened, and So now you have Cody Rhodes coming back into the fold, coming back into WWE. Very likely. Keep in mind, it's not a done deal yet. That he might just do an indie run and cool himself off for a year or so, or something like that, or come back in 6 months to AEW. But the contract issues, the creative issues, that was the big major thing. The creative stuff. Cody wants to do more creative angles. It's kind of like giving him the keys to Free Mile Island to an extent, but okay. I mean, people want to contribute to the Dusty Paradox. All right, then. I think there's a series called Fallout that demonstrates that problem in great detail, but and people thought I couldn't do an hour show on Cody Rhodes. So much for his reputation of being 2.5 stars, right? No, he's a fascinating character. He's really interesting. There are things to like about Cody, there are things to dislike about Cody, there are things to hate about Cody. He's not of a level of a Seth Rollins to me. He doesn't get me riled up. Or, cases like a Gargano, a Zayn, or a Yujiro Takahashi. It's not like anything like that. I just am like very neutral on the guy. And when he does something wrong, I'll talk about it. And if he does something right, I'll talk about it. But like, I just feel very neutral about the situation right now. I feel bad for people in AEW management because this is obviously a situation that's blown up way out of their control. I feel for the people in management who are backstage having to deal with this, who are dealing with all the speculation and the rumors and that, oh, this is an angle. No, I don't think this is an angle. I think he's legitimately gone. Same with Brandy. And it's a situation that has ballooned out of control to the point where, what is going on? What is happening here? It's like, it's this bizarro paradox. It's like a Twilight Zone episode. We didn't expect him to leave yet, but here he is. He's left. He's going apparently to WWE. That's the strangest thing. So anyway, apart from the potential of an international incident in Saudi Arabia, as well as the potential joy and wonderment that will be the 5-star Brandy Rhodes Charlotte Flair match, I do love giving my viewership some nightmares and some food for thought to think about here. But yes, this has been episode 74 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. One of the easier shows I've actually done is just basically one topic that I could talk about, and obviously a lot of layers to peel back on the onion, because onions have layers, and so do the Dusty Paradoxes. Hopefully people won't have nightmares about polka dots or cowbells and stuff like that, or bizarro neck tattoos. And, this is not gonna just be one show this week, folks. There might be a couple. We'll see. Again, for those of you out there who are wondering, you can follow me on Twitter at William Fitzpatrick. That's Fizzpatrick 14 on William Fitzpatrick at Fizzpatrick 14. I'm getting myself back active into wrestling a little bit more because I took a little bit of time off. Obviously, there was some other news that I didn't necessarily feel was particularly appropriate to talk about on this show, but I will probably talk about it on a future show. Here's a hint. It involves another guy that recently attempted to debut in AEW, but got caught for saying some very inappropriate, horrible things. Like Holocaust denial and being anti-Semitic. And as I mentioned beforehand, I'm Romani Jewish. Probably not the kind of things you want to be saying to somebody like me. But we'll get to the evisceration of some sliced bread in a future episode. But I just wanted to talk about something strange and weird and bizarre, and oddly not really about Goldust, but about his even more bizarre, brother in Cody. And yeah, this is bizarre. This is weird, it's frankly a little bit worrying for AEW. But again, like I said, I'm going to be covering AEW in a little bit more detail in a future episode with a special guest. And once that guest is available for his re-debut on the show, because this is somebody that has been on the show before, and maybe we'll bring in a second person. Senju has expressed some interest in possibly doing an AEW show as well, along with, our resident ex-ECW mutant KNA Knight. Things go reasonably. And of course, obviously, they have busy schedules, so there's obviously card is going to be subject to change. But this has been episode 74 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. This has been a really fun show to do. I hope you guys have a great day. Folks, have a great day or week, night or day, whenever you're watching this episode of the show. This is obviously available on the U of Tube. And we will obviously talk about more stuff involving AEW in the future. Certain somebody getting signed. I have to keep my excitement down to a minimum because I'm going to obviously have my... they signed him. And also obviously talking about how half the roster has now suddenly been cursed. By some Ray Harryhausen guy who is too normal for Jamestown. Yes, I am being completely 100% serious when I say that about Danhausen. But anyway, folks, you have a good day or night. If you want more information about economic coverage, you can go follow WrestleNomics to understand the data and to know what in the heck I'm talking about when I talk about economic stuff. May the Barrios Ringo live on at WrestleNomics. Brandon just did a couple of shows about Q4. He also did a couple of shows talking about this very subject, I think for post-wrestling. Which, again, I'm very happy that he has found his new home and is in a good spot at this moment. Obviously, here at Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, it's been, like I said, I don't, for me, I do these plugs because it's something I want to do. Nobody asks me to do them, but I do them anyway because I think that the work that WrestleNomics is doing is absolutely fantastic and is very important for people who understand the economics of the wrestling industry from both an outsider and an insider perspective. But anyway, folks, you have a good day or night, and I'll see you on the next episode of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. It is either going to be talking about a certain Japanese wrestling promotion, AEW, or anything else, because WWE is going into their crazy season. Apparently January, February, or July, August happens to be the crazy months for pro wrestling again. And I have to escape this gigantic paradox of polka dots and plumbers and everything else. This horrific nightmare. But at least we have the 5-star Brodie Rhodes and Charlotte Flair matches to look forward to. On the quality of epicness and level of Melina versus Alicia Fox. You have a good day or night, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you have a good rest. Happy nightmares, and we'll see you on the next edition of Fizzy Wacky World of Wrestling. Bye, folks!